At the core of your belief system is something you call the prime number maze. I'm curious. We got to start there. If
Sure.
we can start anywhere, it's with mathematics. Let's go.
All right, great. A rat can be trained to turn at every even number or every third number in a maze to get some cheese. But evidently, it can't be trained to turn at prime numbers 2, 3, 5, 7, and then 11, and so on and so forth. That's just too abstract. And frankly, if most humans were dropped into a prime number maze, they probably wouldn't be able to figure it out either. They'd have to start counting and so on. Actually, it'd be pretty difficult to figure out what the turning rule was. Yet the rule is actually very simple. And so the thing I think about a lot is just how many patterns in life are we just like these rats and we're trapped in a prime number maze. And if we had just a little bit more, cogitation, if we had, a little bit more cognitive ability, a little bit more, whether it's, brain machine interface or just better physics, we could just figure out the next step in that prime number maze. We could just see it. We could just see the grid. Right. And that's what I think about. Like that's a big thing that drives me, is figuring out how do we actually understand that prime number maze that we're living in.
So understand which patterns are just complex enough that they are beyond the limit of human cognition.
Yes.
And what do you make of that? Are the limits of human cognition a feature or a bug?
I think mostly a bug. I admire Ramanujan. I admire, Feynman. I admire these great mathematicians and physicists who were just able to see things that others couldn't. And just by writing it down, that's a leap forward. People talk about it's not the idea, it's the execution, but that's for trivial ideas. For great ideas, for Maxwell's equations or Newton's laws or quantum electrodynamics or some of Ramanujan's identities, that really does bring us forward, especially when you can check them and you don't know how they work, right? You have the phenomenological, but you don't have the theory underneath it. And then that stimulates the advancement of theory to figure out why is this thing actually work. And that's actually, StatMech, arose in part from the kind of phenomenological studies that were basically being done where people are just getting steam engines and so on to work. And then they kind of abstracted out thermodynamics and so on from that, right? So the practice led the theory rather than vice versa. To some extent, that's happening in neural networks now, as you're aware, right? And I think that's so just something that's true and that works, if we don't know yet, that's amazing and it pulls us forward. So I do think that the limits are more of a bug than a feature.
Is there something that humans will never be able to figure out about our universe, about the theory, about the practice of our universe?
Yeah, people will typically quote Gödel's incompleteness for such a question. And there are things that are provably unknowable or provably unprovable. But I think you can often get an approximate solution. The Hilbert, Hilbert's problems like we will know, we must know. At least we should know that we can't know. Push to get at least an approximate solution. Push to know that we can't know. At least we push back that darkness enough so that we have lit up that corner of the intellectual universe.
Okay, let's actually take a bit of a tangent and explore a bit in a way that I did not expect we would. But let's talk about the nature of reality briefly. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Don Hoffman.
No, I don't. I know Roger Penrose has like his Road to Reality series for like basic physics getting up to everything we know. But go ahead. Tell me.
It's even wilder.
Yeah.
In modern physics, we start the question of what is fundamental and what is emergent in this beautiful universe of ours. And there's a bunch of folks who think that space-time, as we know it, the four-dimensional space, is emergent. It's not fundamental to the physics of the universe. And the same, many argue, I think Sean Carroll is one of them, is that time itself, the way we experience it, is also emergent. It's not fundamental to the way our universe works. Anyway, those are the technical term. I apologize for swearing. Those are the mind fucks of modern physics. But if we stroll along that road further, we get somebody like Donald Hoffman, who makes the evolutionary case that the reality we perceive with our eyes is not only an abstraction of objective reality, but it's actually completely detached. Like we're in a video game, essentially, that's consistent consistent for all humans, but it's not at all connected to physical reality. So it's an illusion.
It's like a version of the simulation hypothesis. Is that his?
In a very distant way, but the simulation says that there's a sort of computational nature to reality, and then there's a kind of a programmer that creates this reality and so on. No, he says that we humans have a brain that is able to perceive the environment, and evolution has produced from primitive life to complex life on Earth, produced the kind of brain that doesn't at all need to sense the reality directly. So, like this table, according to Donald Hoffman, is not there.
Well, so
like
that
not just as an abstraction, like we don't sense the molecules that make up the table, but all of this is fake.
interesting. So I tend to be more of a hard science person, right? And so so just on that, people talk about qualia, like is your perception of green different from my perception of green? And my counter argument on that is, well, we know something about spectrum of light, and we can build artificial eyes. And if we can build artificial eyes, which we can, they're not amazing, but you can do that. You can build artificial ears and so on. Obviously, we can build recording devices and for cameras and things like that. Well, operationally, the whole concept of your perception of green, you see green as purple, I see green as green, or what I call green, doesn't seem to add up, because it does seem like we can do engineering around it, right? So the Hoffman thing, I get why people more broadly will talk about a simulation hypothesis, because it's like Feynman, many others have talked about how math is surprisingly useful to describe the world. Like very simple equations give rise to these complex phenomena. Wolfram is also on this from a different angle with the cellular automata stuff. But
it's almost suspicious how well it works.
Yeah, but on the other hand, it's like it is. Yet we're still also in a prime number maze. There's things we just don't understand, and
right.
So
also within the constraints of the non-prime numbers, we find math to be extremely effective, surprisingly effective.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe the math we have gets us through the equivalent of the even turns and the odd turns, but there's math we don't yet have that is more complex, or more complex rules for other parts.
Despite all our rage, we're all just rats in a cage.
I know that gets like very abstract, but there are unsolved problems in physics. Like the condensed matter space, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. My recollection, I may be out of date on this, like things like sonoluminescence, we don't know exactly how they work. And sometimes those things that are like at the edges of physics, in the late 1800s, I think Rutherford, somebody, I think it was Rutherford, said, basically all physics is being discovered, et cetera. And that was obviously before quantum mechanics. That sort of edge case, people are looking at the Balmer and the Paschen series and seeing, this weird thing, with the hydrogen spectrum, and it was quantized, and that led to like the sort of phenomenological set of observations that led to quantum mechanics and everything. And sometimes I think the UAP stuff might be like that, right? People immediately go to aliens for UAP, like the unidentified aerial phenomena, right? And people have been there's surprising amount of stuff out there on this. The UK has declassified a bunch of material. Harry Reid, who's a senator, has talked about this. It's not an obviously political thing, which is good. It's something that is there something happening there, right? Mm-hmm. And people had thought for a long time that the UAP thing was a like American kind of counter propaganda to cover up their new spy planes that were spying over the Soviet Union, to make anybody who talked about them seem, crazy and hysterical or whatever. But if the UAP thing is real, it could be atmospheric phenomena like the aurora borealis or the northern lights, but some things we don't understand. It could be something like the Balmer and Paschen series, which were the observations of like emission spectra before quantum mechanics. So that's like another option, as opposed to doesn't exist or little green men. It could be physics we don't understand yet.